There we go.
All right, we are recording. Fantastic. Well, hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. And we want to mark the return of John Drew to our midst. There he is. Everybody say hi, John.
Hey, John.
There he is. Good to have you back, buddy. And Tony on his cell phone. Vaughn is here. Okay, I think we're ready to go. What I wanted to do is go back a page because there was just no good place to get started. So let's start on page 54. And we'll read quickly through the first page and a half just to kind of get ourselves reoriented. And then we'll dive into the new material for tonight. But before we do that, does anyone want to derail us with something that they need to talk about or something they've been thinking about from last week? Anything on your minds? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Very good. All right, so we have moved into chapter 4, and this is the tragic sense of life. And so he is making the argument that life really is understood more by the exceptions than I suppose by the rule, in a sense that we think of life as being uniform, or that it should be uniform, and of course uniformly good, but it's really more defined by the difficulties, the traumas and the tragedies that occur. And those are really our growth spurts and our learning opportunities. And although we tend to want to pray those away, they really are what give purpose to life, because that's where we really learn what we're here to learn and to fulfill what we're here to fulfill. So that's the argument that he's building. And the tragic natural world at the bottom of page 54, we read this in the following page, but I want to start here, and we're just going to get a running start on it, and we'll go from there. So in our time, it is quantum physics that shows how true Unamuno's explanation might really be. What was Unamuno's explanation? Well, first of all, he's the one who coined the phrase, the tragic sense of life. And if you go back to the top of page 54, by this clear and honest phrase, I understand Unamuno to mean that life is not, nor ever has been, a straight line forward. According to him, life is characterized much more by exception and disorder than by total or perfect order. Okay, so that's the position of this Spanish philosopher that he's jumping off from. Most of us were formed by Newtonian worldviews in which everything had a clear cause and an equal effect. What might be called an if-then worldview. All causality was clear and defined. The truth we are now beginning to respect is that the universe seems to proceed through a web of causes, just as human motivation does, producing ever-increasing diversity, multiplicity, dark holes, dark matter, death and rebirth, loss and renewal in different forms. And yes, even violence, the continual breaking of the rules of reason that make wise people look for more all-embracing rules and a larger logic. And we talked about how Newtonian mechanics deal with direct cause and effect. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and gravity and all these sources, they're very linear, they're very straightforward, and they deal with macro bodies. But when you get down into the subatomic particles, everything is really governed by probability. You can't know the exact location, direction, and speed of any given particle. In fact, the more you know about one value, the less you're going to know about another value, and your very observation changes the nature of what the particles are doing anyway. So it really is a very messy, non-linear, non-logical look at what's really going on in the universe in the underlying portions, in that unseen portion. So this is what he's using as an analogy for what is happening in the spiritual world and in our spiritual formation. We think that it all is going to go nice and neat and tidy by Newtonian mechanics, but really what we got is a quantum field going on underneath, okay? Any questions? Did I muddy the waters for anybody? Okay, just an analogy here. Moving on. Nature is much more disorder than order, more multiplicity than uniformity, with the greatest disorder being death itself. In the spiritual life, and now in science, we learn much more by honoring and learning from the exceptions by just imposing our previous certain rules to make everything fit. You can see perhaps what Jesus and Paul both meant by telling us to honor the least of the brothers and sisters and to clothe them with the greatest care. It is those creatures and those humans who are on the edge of what we have defined as normal, proper, or good, who often have the most to teach us. They tend to reveal the shadow and mysterious side of things. Such constant exceptions make us revisit the so-called rule and what we call normal and recalibrate. The exceptions keep us humble and searching and not rushing toward resolution to allay our anxiety. That's kind of what we were saying about paradox, right? If we're rushing to try to resolve the paradox, if we're rushing to make a choice, what one side is right and the other side is wrong, just because we're too fearful and anxious to stay between the horns of the paradox, then we're going to miss this humility. We're going to miss the aspect of searching, of questioning, that by which process we really do get our spiritual knowing, quote unquote. Not by choosing one or the other and moving back into a dualistic understanding, but by staying in that liminal space and moving through. Our daily experience of this world is almost nothing like Plato's world of universal and perfect forms and ideas. It is always filled with huge diversity and variations on every theme, from neutrino light inside of darkness to male seahorses that bear their young, to the most extraordinary flowers that only open at night for no one to see. Jesus had no trouble with the exceptions, whether they were prostitutes, drunkards, Samaritans, lepers, Gentiles, tax collectors, or wayward sheep. He ate with outsiders regularly, to the chagrin of the church stalwarts, who always loved their version of order over any compassion toward the exceptions. Just the existence of a single mentally challenged or mentally ill person should make us change any of our theories about the necessity of some kind of correct thinking as the definition of salvation. Yet we have a history of excluding and torturing people who do not think right. Take a look at that sentence again. It's a big one. Just the existence of a single mentally challenged or mentally ill person should make us change any of our theories about the necessity of some kind of correct thinking as a definition of salvation. Somebody riddle me that. What's he saying? Because that's a mouthful.
Well, yeah. Well, for what I have recognized personally and those around me, one, that if there is a modern day leper around, it's those with mental illness. People that are mentally ill, most of society would be prefer that it's at arm's, this human being, this illness is at arm's length. Typically, I would just put them away where we don't have to there. So, and my hypothesis because of that is that it frightens most people to be not sane and such. But conversely, also on the other side of this coin, we're talking about, it's like, okay, so God loves us, wants us all to be saved, or again, eternally in unity with himself. And much of Christianity says, well, we've got to have the right understanding of what salvation is to put together the correct verses and tie it together, and we've got the correct paradigm that unlocks the door. But if this person that again just doesn't seem to have reason with them, why did God create somebody who couldn't connect the dots? And it would be impossible for that person to have salvation. Basically, it's like, well, then, yeah, if this person is going to be not of reasonable mind, it's highly probable, if not impossible, that they would ever have salvation. So basically, why would God create a human being just for them to be cast off to Hades?
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And just to add to that, this, whatever systems we had in place that was working, when the wheels come off the cart sometimes, we end up with these mental illnesses that are a response to, losing our way. So the very paradox he's talking about, the very outliers he's talking about, might even precipitate what we call a mental illness, when that mental illness may be a becoming in and of itself in some way.
Right.
So now, are we talking different between mental illness and special needs?
No, he's putting them all together.
Yeah,
Okay.
he
Because-
included mental challenge in there as well.
Yeah, because to answer you, Randy, though, then I would say no. I don't think because somebody has special needs. I mean, my son, he does on Thursday a special needs group, and I got to tell you, it's probably one of the most beautiful things I experience now. I go every Thursday. That's the one I don't want to break. And to see these kids, and actually young adults, raising their hands, praising God. Hey, maybe they might not have the same grasp of what's going on, let's say, as you or Pastor Dave, but they do get it. And there's a spiritual movement there that when I watch these kids, I start crying. It's just unbelievable. The amount of excitement, passion that they start singing praise and worship songs. When Stratton does his Bible study part, it's only about 15 minutes the most. Most of it is about getting the kids amped up with music and, getting excited, getting movement, getting them all together. Then after that, then he does some jokes, then some games. Then he brings them down, worship songs. Then he goes into his study for about 15 minutes, breaks it into into individual groups, and then another hype song, and they go. That's kind of like the pattern every single time. But they know what's coming. They get excited about it every time. And, the community that's been built between like the parents and these kids, it's just mind blowing. And so, no, I think God, we perceive it that way. It's not what God perceives, and it's not what they perceive.
No. And again, I agree with you completely. And I would look at, if I was still in Southern California, I'd be like, let's go. I'd love to see that, because it's very much, again, you must come to me like a child type of worship experience is. So I'm getting goosebumps. I'd love to do this. But why I brought up the kind of the analogy of mental illness being so scary to many citizens, it reminded me of, the verse of what you do for the least of these, you are doing for me. Yeah. And that just, again, that part that resonates with me is that if a person has special needs or has mental illness and stuff, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And I guess it's for each individual to reckon with.
No, and I agree. And I agree with you. To be honest with you, I still haven't fully engaged. As I'm getting to know people more, like this girl, Vivian, every time she sees me, Frank, come. And, she'll grab me, hug me, start trying to drag me to dance. And I'm not there yet. I'm still kind of I got my toes in. I just haven't fully dived in yet. So I understand what you're saying about fear.
Yeah, but again,
I don't know what to do.
Yeah, but of course, Rohr's, what he's talking about here is a very big generalization and such. Yeah. So again, if God created this perfect system, and again, the way that we are perfect enough to join into this system, having the correct theology and the correct understanding of this theology and stuff, would that, again, I'm interpreting this I don't know what word to preposition is not the word and stuff, but again, this proposition is that, yeah, if you have to have it all figured out and being right in your head, then what we are concluding is somebody is not right in the head would logically exclude them from God's kingdom. And again, that's illogical. And I would say impossible, because God does not create. And what our stories in our head of what perfect are is not necessarily perfect. Again, the whole theme of this is what we think is perfect and correct is not perfect and correct in God's kingdom. I'll end it there.
Yeah. I mean, the way-
Biochemistry being,
Go ahead,
Biochemistry.
William.
sorry.
Who
go ahead,
has
Bill.
it? Me?
Yeah, go ahead,
Um,
William, and then Vaughn.
I keep thinking of my clients' perspectives and how often they have the perspective of, I must have done something to piss God off to be going through what I'm going through. So to piggyback on what Randy was saying about them being, they see themselves as the modern day lepers who are somehow forsaken, just somehow not getting the love that they think they deserve, or the love we all think we deserve, I suppose. And it's I don't know what I want to do with that thought, but it's
Maybe I can amplify that. My sense is, I don't know what spectrum of people you deal with, William, but my experience have been with hospitalized patients, psychiatric facilities, as well as generalized garden variety neurotics like you and me, is different. The people who've had classic neurological deficits, psychosis and bipolar, because of biochemistry differences, are certainly qualified as the lepers that you're talking about, because they routinely, without medication, can be quite interesting to deal with. I remember one gal I used to see on the outpatient basis, and when she went into a manic episode, and I went to see her one time at the hospital, and my colleague said, before you go in there, be aware she's in a manic episode. She tried to take a swing at me. So there's a difference when they hit these phases that are not under their control. They're simply but they're driven by their biochemistry. They are certainly the lepers of our society. I don't know about the others, but there's spectrum there. But I certainly know that those people who are biochemically challenged are certainly uniquely leperish, I think. Does that make sense, Bill?
yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I have a
here-
question for William. I'd like to ask you, William, because it just struck me when you said that your clients think that they did something to piss God off. Can you hear me? Let's see, I'm not muted, right? Right?
I can, yeah.
Okay, you can hear me, because I'm in recovery and I've got some sobriety behind me, but I never thought it was God mad at me. I always knew that I was messing up and that it was right on my shoulders, and I didn't need the steps to tell me that, so I'm kind of surprised me to hear, it really does surprise me to hear someone else's completely different take on that.
Well,
And that you really hear
mean,
that often.
I have a couple of clients. I have one client who I just started working with. He has a kid that has about 20 seizures a day. And another one that I mentioned before with a kid with multiple muscular dystrophy, and his wife has multiple sclerosis, or I forgot which one has which, but
No,
the
that's
kid is
an interesting, because that's an argument that a lot of people, not a lot, but people that I value their opinion, who have turned their back on God. And that's the reason. And that they say that why would God allow there to be children with cancer? So
Right.
That's what you're getting at it with saying that. Yeah. So Dave, we should bring Dave back into that topic, because that's really can be a real sticking point for a lot of people.
Well, we're a little
Early
off topic here,
before.
so let me try to bring it back in to where we started with this thing. We've really been looking at it from the point of view of the person who is mentally challenged or mentally ill, or in some way disabled, I suppose. But rather than saying, why did God create someone who can't understand the gospel, the real question, and I think the one that Rohr is diving into, is why would we create a litmus test for salvation that excludes people who are not intellectually capable of having the kind of right or orthodox thinking that we demand?
Yes.
We've created this step. God didn't create it, and so this is what he's saying. Look at the sentence again, that, well, I think I lost the page here. But he said the existence of just one mentally challenged person or mentally ill person should make us change any of our theories about the necessity of some kind of correct thinking as a definition of salvation. And if we are really going to learn from the exceptions, what we would consider the tragedies of life, then these are the very people who can teach that to us. And yet these are the people that we, as we started off, Randy, saying, these are the people that we fear. These are the people we want to put in a back bedroom someplace and pretend they don't exist. And yet these are the very people that we can learn the most from. And Frank's beautiful rendition of what Stratton is doing there kind of tells us and shows us how much we can learn from people that we would say are outside of the orthodoxy that we would demand. And so it's a whole, again, so much of this is taking what we think we know and turning it around 180 degrees to be able to see things through Jesus' eyes, who is looking through the Father's eyes and seeing life in a whole different way. And that's what this second half of life transition is really all about. Can we make that transition? Are we willing to stretch ourselves that much or allow ourselves to be bendable enough to be able to get into a completely different position? And that's the constant question that we're going to be up against as we continue to delve into this material. And for those of us who are really trying to move into a second half of life context, that's going to be the way of it, a constant stretching and bending. It's going to be spiritual hot yoga. Get used to it.
And David makes me think a little bit about like it's easy, like when Frank described, those groups and what that process looks like, to see that, yes, obviously God wouldn't exclude people with limitation and things of that nature. But if you're talking to someone with equal intellect and their level of understanding is not on par, it's much more difficult for me to extend that courtesy, basically.
Oh,
Like I would look at it almost like the age of reason. So if all of a sudden, like in Jewish culture, if it was like 13 years old, or I think even Catholicism, I think it was, you made your confirmation at 13 and so on and so forth. Well, if somebody doesn't have that capacity, to me, I would logically go to age of reason. They just because they can't have the same grasp that I have, I would instantly think, yeah, they're a part of it. Now, I still might have the fear of getting around them. I might still go, oh, but what I think God is touching them, can reveal himself to them and so on and so forth in whatever state they are. Yeah, I believe that. Now it's my hang up, my fear.
But Frank, I like that language, the age of reason, right? And that's exactly what I was talking about. Is like we have a different standard for the kid who is past the age of reason, where he's supposed to be able to understand certain things, right? And right. The attitude shifts with that person, but we're still trapped in the reason, and we're still trapped in.
Right. I've been reading a little Jordan Peterson. He's a Canadian clinical psychologist, and I think some of the stuff he's been saying fits this. He says that kind of all of us have moments of insanity and then moments where we're sane, and that what we do is we sort of check each other. That over the course of a day, you'll interact with people, and if you're really doing something insane, somebody will bump up against you somehow, or they'll remind you that you're doing something that's inappropriate or ineffective. Or if you're doing something correctly, people will help you. And he says this happens constantly, that people are constantly checking you, so that over the course of my day, everybody around me is checking my level of sanity. And if it looks like I've dipped a little too far, they'll usually let me know with a hint or a suggestion. And that I'm actually doing the same thing with all the people around me, that if I notice somebody doing something insane, where they're like hurting themselves or, or like molesting a child or, something really awful, well, I'm going to step in. And he says that's actually how we regulate and how you define sanity, is those group connections that kind of keep us in place.
Hmm.
So, I mean, to me, that's kind of nice, because it helps to explain why it's okay for us to, if somebody's having a manic episode, it's okay for us to intervene and say, you don't hit people, or if somebody's feeling grief, and we let them know it's okay to feel grief. So I can see where we interact with each other to help us maintain our individual sanity, so to speak.
But the point that we're coming from, and hopefully getting back to, is that everybody, regardless of their intellect, or regardless of whether they have even crossed the age of reason, and we could argue that some kids do not ever get to the age of reason, Down syndrome and so on and so forth, everybody has equal access to the kingdom. Everyone has equal access to God's love. We are creating these standards, these bars, these litmus tests that would tend to exclude people who cannot, for either cultural or intellectual reasons, embrace the orthodox concept. And that's us. That's on us. That's not on God. And of course, it doesn't apply. It can't apply if God is who Jesus says he is. And that was the point of all of this. And the fact that we can learn from the outliers, we can learn from the exceptions, and we can certainly learn from our own personal tragedies and difficulties in life. And that's where we actually do learn. So I think we need to go on, because if we get to the end of the session and we've gone backwards, I will never hear the end of it. So I want to make sure we're in positive territory before this session ends. So right in the middle of page 56, I remember the final words of my professor of church history, a very Orthodox priest theologian, who said as he walked out of the classroom after our 4 years of study with him, well, after all is said and done, remember that church practice has been more influenced by Plato than by Jesus. And we reeled in astonishment. But the 4 years of history had spoken for themselves. What he meant, of course, was that we invariably prefer the universal synthesis, the answer that settles all the dust and resolves every question, even when it is not entirely true, over the mercy and grace of God. Jesus did not seem to teach that one size fits all, but instead that his God adjusts to the vagaries and failures of the moment. This ability to adjust to human disorder and failure is named God's providence or compassion. Every time God forgives us, God is saying that God's own rules do not matter as much as the relationship that God wants to create with us. Just the biblical notion of absolute forgiveness, once experienced, should be enough to make us trust and seek and love God. This is the same idea of sometimes you have to break the rules in order to fulfill the intent of the rules. That ethics are situational, that the way of Jesus is to bring our full presence into every situation and not a set of rules, so that we can make the choice that love really requires, and so that we can leave people better than we found them. But we humans have a hard time with the specific, the concrete, the individual, the anecdotal story, which hardly ever fits the universal mold. So we pretend. Maybe that is why we like and need humor, which invariably reveals these inconsistencies. In Franciscan thinking, this specific, individual, concrete thing is always God's work and God's continuing choice, precisely in its uniqueness, not in its uniformity. Duns Scotus called it thisness. Christians believe that incarnation showed itself in one unique specific person, Jesus. It becomes his pattern too, as he leaves the 99 for the one lost sheep. Some theologians have called this divine pattern of incarnation the scandal of the particular. Our mind, it seems, is more pleased with universals, never broken, always applicable rules and patterns that allow us to predict and control things. This is good for science, but lousy for religion. All right.
Reminded of the scripture that says, "Who are you, O man, to comprehend the mind of God?" So as we sit here and try and figure out these things that we're trying to figure out meaning and get our purpose out of them, there's going to be things we don't understand. I mean, we're not God in itself, and I thank God for that, because I wouldn't want that responsibility.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's a great insight there, buddy. Now, this is coming right back to Jesus, do not judge. Or that great scene where Mary, breaks the expensive jar of perfume and pours it all over Jesus' hair and his feet. And Judas is incensed because that money could have been used to give to the poor. So Judas is working on the big, universal, overarching imperative, right? We need to feed the poor. Jesus is talking about the concrete and specific instance of his relationship and his connection immediately with Mary, and the overwhelming emotion and sense of devotion that caused her to behave the way that she did. This is the same, you're always going to have the poor with us, Jesus says, but you're not always going to have me. And so for us to be much more attuned to the specific and concrete situation or person that's right in our path, as opposed to all these universals that are really neat and tidy in our mind, and we would like to believe are true because they give us this absolute mathematical equation for our salvation and for our risk-free passage through life, but life doesn't work that way. And this is where Jesus is trying to get us back. Be in the situation. Make your choices there. You're going to have to actually think and feel your way through each one of these circumstances. You can't just passively and mindlessly apply this one-size-fits-all law and rule and think that you're doing anything that has a vestige of kingdom living in it. And so this is the whole, again, the whole change that we're trying to make as we pass through all of this. The universe story and the human story are a play of forces, rational and non-rational, conscious and unconscious, of fate and fortune, nature and nurture. Forces of good and evil play out their tragedies and their graces, leading us to catastrophes, backtracking, mutations, transgressions, regroupings, enmities, failures, mistakes, and impossible dilemmas. We'll get to the good part later, he promises. Did you know that the Greek word for tragedy means goat story? The Odyssey is a primal goat story where poor Odysseus keeps going forward and backward, up and down, but mostly down, all the way home to Ithaca. Interesting, goat story, right? Actually, when I did a little research on that, because I'd never heard of the goat story before, it really comes up as a goat song, usually than a goat story. And it refers to the final act of Greek plays, but also to the cult of Dionysus, who was the god of wine and celebration and fertility. And his attendants were the satyrs. I don't know if you remember the satyrs. They're either half horse and half man, or half goat and half man. And they were portrayed by people wearing goat skins in the plays. But the idea is that the satyrs represented the basest, most primal and earthy of human qualities. And there were more details about satyrs that I won't get into right now, but they are very primal, they're very earthy. And so this is idea of descending, the goat story being the song that descends us down before it brings us up on the other side, that we're going to have to experience both sides of this human condition, I think is probably the rationale behind the goat story as coming down to us as the word tragedy. But nobody really knows the significance of the goat story beyond that very much. But it does have to do with this next paragraph where he's going to talk about hubris, because moving down into our primal aspects, accepting those and acknowledging that they're part of who we are is part and parcel to our ability to find our humility, to find our vulnerability and dependence, and not pretend that we're somehow living above the fray, that we can keep our hands clean and we can stay in the straight line with our white robes and never descend into that. We need to descend into that. We need to acknowledge that that is who we are as well. And so that descent is everything that is able to show us something about our true nature and bring us into this position of humility where we can really connect with each other and with God. So here's the way Rohr puts it. Each of these experiences, these tragic and difficult experiences, is meant to lead us to a new knowledge and a movement forward in some sense. Yet it is always a humbled knowledge. Greek hubris was precisely the refusal to be humbled by what should have been humbling. Notice how no American president can fully admit that his war or his policies were wrong, ever. Popes and clergy have not been known for apologizing. Such pride and delusion was the core of every Greek tragedy and became the precise staging for the transformation of Jesus himself into a new kind of life that we called the risen Christ. Is this making any sense? Once again, it is the difficulties in life, these tragedies, these exceptions to what we would like to see as the uniformity of our salvation are what actually move us forward, that bring us in contact with our true human nature, that allow us to be humble and dependent and vulnerable and find our way in the direction that we would never want for ourselves or would like to accept. So the tragedy is not accepting that. The tragedy is the hubris of trying to maintain the illusion of our prideful self without letting ourselves move into this deeper space. No thoughts on that? I don't know. Becky looks like she wants to say something. No? William is laughing. I don't know what he's thinking, but there's that.
I'm just agreeing, and it's just like I kept thinking of a couple of the Beatitudes there, like blessed is he who is at the end of his rope, blessed are the humble, blessed are the yada yada yada. I don't remember how the other ones go, but it's we talked about this idea before, this humbling and allowing the tragedy itself to remind us to humble ourselves, and thus we can welcome it. And I like, I was talking to a client earlier about the welcoming prayer, and you said something earlier that I added to my note. It's like, the welcoming prayer is for everything we pray goes away.
Hey, that's pretty good. I like that.
But yeah, it's in those moments when we can humble ourselves, and it's in the lowering ourselves that we can, like whenever I think of humility, I think of Lao Tzu and this idea that the ocean gets its greatness because it's lower than the rivers that lead into it, essentially. And it's like,
now we're getting somewhere.
You get into a deeper, more vast connection place when you humble yourself like the ocean, basically.
Very cool.
So
And
yeah,
I love that. I love that insight about the welcoming prayer, because the welcoming prayer is for all the things that we would normally want to pray away, and yet the welcoming prayer is to accept, to sit with, to lean into, and to actually welcome as a friend the difficult emotion that is triggering you, because it has something to teach. At the same time, we're not going to let it drag us around by the nose. Our affirmations are to say, yes, help me let go of my need for control. Help me let go of my need for security and self-esteem and power and control. And so that I can do the thing that is still loving in this moment. But yeah, it's the opposite. If our knee-jerk reaction is to try to pray away these difficulties and these difficult emotions and thoughts, the welcoming prayers are to remind us, no, bring it in, allow it to do its work on us. But don't let it allow us to act on those in a way that hurts others or relationship. I love that. That's great insight, William.
Well, I was going to say, with what William said, it can also work in reverse. I mean, I've been having a real struggle because Laura is worth way more than me, and so now I'm intimidated because, she deals with movie star clients, she deals with really high-end, mega rich people. And so, and so now all of a sudden here I feel like inadequate, and I'm having to struggle to say, could my love actually be enough? Is that enough? And then even if it is, how is my ego going to deal with this? Because I don't want to be like one of the other guys that took from her. And I don't want to be another one of those guys that she was having to take care of. And so it's been a real struggle trying to figure out, there's been many a time I'm just wondering, do I just walk away? do I not do this? But everything keeps telling me to lean into it and just see where it goes, but just try not to hold tightly to it. Just say, hey, look, she wants to be with you for whatever reason. I can't figure it out, but she does. So, instead of running away, instead of letting my ego say, I got to be the man. I gotta be in control. I gotta provide. It's like, okay, I just got to do what I can do and offer what I can offer and let it be up to her to decide what she wants to do with it.
Of all the times I've hung out with you, Frank,
Pardon?
of all the times I've hung out with you, Frank,
Yeah.
not once have I thought, how much money has the guy got?
Because
You
you
got a
knew
lot
I
of
didn't
great
have
qualities.
those.
You got a lot of great qualities, Frank.
Thank you.
Oh, how nice. Yeah.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
But there's one good thing, Frank. If you're dating a woman who needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, man, that went over like a ton of bricks. Remember that? Gloria Steinman. Remember Gloria Steinman, whatever her name was? Back in the women's power, there was a book called "A Woman Needs a Man Like a Fish Needs a Bicycle." So if she doesn't need you to provide, if she's loving you, man, then it's for all the right reasons. That's a really cool thing. I mean, you're in a really good space, actually, if you think about it that way.
Well, I understand it intellectually, but I guess emotionally, I'm still.
I hear it. I get it. Well, you're doing the right thing. You're over there taking care of the dogs, so that's a good thing.
Frank,
Yeah.
it's a good problem to have.
Welcome to prayer, my friend.
Perfectly stated, you guys. Yeah. All right. A little bit more here. Let's see. Where did I leave off? I'm so confused.
The gospel on page
Okay. The
58.
gospel was able to accept. The gospel was able to accept that life is tragic, but then graciously added that we can survive and will even grow from this tragedy. This is the great turnaround. It all depends on whether we are willing to see down as up, or as Jung put it, that where you stumble and fall, there you find pure gold. Lady Julian put it even more poetically. First there is the fall, and then we recover from the fall, and both are the mercy of God. We should have been prepared for this pattern, given that the whole drama was set in motion by the transgression, quote unquote, of Adam and Eve. And then the whole world was redeemed, say many Christians, by an act of violent murder. Obviously, he's talking about the cross there. If God has not learned to draw straight with crooked lines, God is not going to be drawing very many lines at all. Ooh, grasshopper, did you get that line? I had to read that one over a few times. What in the heck is he really saying? If God has not learned to draw straight with crooked lines, God is not going to be drawing very many lines at all. I mean, I don't know if I can actually parse that sentence for you, but at least I can say generally what he's talking about is that this isn't about a straight line from where we are to what we would consider salvation, that we're going to have to take that typical Paschal mystery shape, the descent before the ascent, lots of curves and blind alleys that we have to come back out of and start over again, mistakes that take us into the ditch and we come back out again. That's going to be the shape of the journey. It's going to feel like 2 steps forward and a step back. And we think that there's something wrong when life takes that shape, but there's nothing wrong. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. And if we aren't willing to take a risk, I mean, what's Frank talking about right now? But taking a risk with this new woman in his life. And his heart's already out a mile there, so he's cooked if anything goes wrong anyway. But he's willing to take the risk. If we're not willing to do that, then what the heck is life about? We got to be willing to do that. And if we think that there's some safe road that we can take that's straight as an arrow to where we want to go, we're deceiving ourselves. Life doesn't work that way. So I think all of that is in this cryptic little sentence of Rohr's.
It made me think of a thought you had shared with us earlier about mythology. The idea that we're using what was never true to communicate what was always true. You know, like that kind of.
Yeah, Marcus Borg's line, and see if I can, it's myth is stories of things that never were, but always are.
but always are.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. You know, myth is a 4-letter word. It's actually it actually is a 4-letter word, isn't it? It's a 4-letter word to conservative Christians because they just see it as something that's not true. So if there's any myth in the Bible, it means it's not true, but that's not true. You know, it's things that never were, but always are. It is the way for us to be able to depict something that we cannot express directly. You know, it's the closest we can get to pointing us toward this evergreen truth that we're trying to apprehend in our spiritual journeys. So, Judeo-Christian salvation history is an integrating, using, and forgiving of this tragic sense of life. Basically a falling into salvation, not a climb upward, but a falling into, right? Integrating, using, and forgiving this tragic sense of life. Judeo-Christianity includes the problem inside the solution and as part of the solution. The genius of the biblical revelation is that it refuses to deny the dark side of things, but forgives failures and integrates falling to achieve its only promised wholeness, which is much of the point of this whole book. I love that about the Bible. Every single hero of faith is compromised. Every single one of them. They got their flaws. They got things they really, really screw up on. You know, they do things that we would never in a million years dream of doing, let alone be forgiven for on the other side. I mean, David is a perfect example, my namesake. The things that he does, and yet he's always and never ceases to be God's beloved. And he never ceases to see himself as God's beloved, which is really maybe the larger miracle, you know, for everything that he did. But go right down the line. Jacob was a real jerk. And you got Esau and you got Noah and every single one of them, Moses, has these huge flaws and things that they did. But the Bible does not shy away from the dark side. The Bible realizes that we have to integrate both and we have to celebrate both and we have to take these big dives into and descent into the tragedy of life if we're ever going to be able to understand and come out the other side. So,
You know, Dave, I get all of this and I buy it, but I'm also very aware that this is much easier to embrace when you're on the top side of the rabbit hole. That when you're down the rabbit hole and it's all dark, to be able to even remember or believe that this is the pattern, this crooked line to pull you out of it, is darn near impossible.
And you know, what you're saying is exactly right. And this is why I think it's so important for us to be talking along these lines, to be having these discussions and to be able to point out these roadmaps for the spiritual journey. Because 30 years ago when I was starting out, I didn't have these. And it made it really, really difficult. If I had known something about rites of passage, the hero's journey, the first and second half of life, the stages of spiritual growth, you know, the Enneagram, the descent and the ascent, the Paschal mystery, any of these things that we talk about and kind of are taking for granted at this point, you know, as we walk down the path together, it would have made it so much easier because of exactly what you say, Becky. When the road gets really difficult, when I'm down at the bottom of the rabbit hole and I am wondering, am I completely off track? Am I totally screwed? Has God completely left me? Or am I still on a part of this journey that still makes sense? Is there still purpose in the pain? And I think this motif that we're talking about here can help us to understand, yes, when the going gets really, really difficult, when we really feel the most lost, we are still learning something if we persevere, if we keep on going. But I'm not going to necessarily be thinking that rationally in the midst of my pain, but at least I can keep going because I can sense that there still is purpose in it. And so I don't know if that, you didn't really ask a question, but if that kind of speaks to your concern, but I know that I wish that I had had some of these tools and
My hunch, and I could be totally wrong here, and certainly I work with a very particular population, so my background is skewed. But I think it's something that once you come out of it, you can sort of look back on it and say, oh yeah, I see it now. But I don't know when you're deep down in that rabbit hole, that it's something you can even take in. That, at least that's been my experience with clients. I mean, the best I think we can offer sometimes is to just be with them. But I understand.
Yeah, I agree with you there that at times in people's lives, if you're trying to help, that's not the time for a rational discourse on the hero's journey. Obviously not. But I think a sense of there still being purpose in the pain can make all the difference. That great story that Viktor Frankl tells in Man's Search for Meaning, where the elderly physician comes in for counseling and his wife has died, and he's just in grief that he cannot move through, he can't contain, and it's so debilitating for him. And after listening to him for a while, Frankl asks him, well, what would have happened if you had died first? And he said, oh, it would have been horrible. She would have had such a difficult time, and this and this and this. He says, so in a sense, her dying first was a gift to her, even though you have to bear the burden of it. And he thought about it for a while. He gets up, gets his hat and coat, leaves, and never comes back. So it's that idea, if we can see purpose in the pain, it changes the nature of the experience of it. And I don't know, when you're working with someone who's in the midst of all of that, if you can in any way communicate that other than just being present. But at least for us, when we're going through the pain, if we have been immersed in this enough, maybe we can bring it up into a place where we can at least take another step and a step after that, because we know we're still going someplace. We're not off the track. God is not pissed at us, as William was talking about. And yes, we still have a connection that'll see us through.
The way I see it too with the straight line, God does make straight lines. Only it's like several different straight lines that has what you call hinge moments, right? That's why it looks crooked. But it goes straight, and then maybe half an inch later, it hinges, has a crook. And it's straight for about 2 inches, and then it's a crook. That's how I see it. I think that's how I see where every day there's something, things are going well, and then suddenly something happens. Well, that's like you call a hinge moment. So our life.
I like that. That's right? Great. Let's all write to Rohr and say he's all full of it.
Yeah. He's becoming
but the thing too, Maggie, would be, your client saying, in deep pain. I was in deep pain. You don't see that light at the end of the tunnel until one is ready to go up. Then you go, oh, little by little, there it is. And there it is. Yeah. It takes a long time. Yeah.
Well, then if you can't remember all of this, at least remember Winston Churchill. When you're going through hell, keep going.
I like the saying that says, when you find yourself in darkness, never forget what God taught you when you walked in the light.
There you go.
I gotta tell you, I grew up with a family where the motto was, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger.
Don't you
hate that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's like when you're really depressed, telling someone to snap out of it. I always said, you have my permission to slap them right in the face when they say something like that. It just misses the whole point. And I realize that, anything that we're talking about would sound that way to someone who's in the midst of a really, really dark night of the soul. And so, we can't think that we can reason or rationally bring this to someone in that position. But maybe we can bring it to ourselves. Maybe if we have steeped in it enough in the light, as Scott says, that we can remember it in the dark, or at least it can keep us going. And that's huge. If this book and this whole line of study does anything for us, I hope that it embeds in us a sense of the shape of the journey so that we don't fear the tragedies or the blind alleys, as we're moving forward.
And for the
and for the. Oh, sorry.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, and for the women out there, I like Eleanor Roosevelt's quote.
Oh, go
A
for it.
woman, let's see, how does it go? You never know how strong a woman is until a woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she gets into hot water.
Yeah, I like that one. Yeah.
Sorry, William, go ahead.
I like that one. I'm gonna use that.
We'll let the men use it too, so it's okay.
I don't know. It's a little too domestic for us.
Oh, no.
We need automatic weapons in there someplace.
Oh.
Were you going to say something smart, William?
It went away, I think.
Oh, no. I hate when that happens. It went into the boiling water with the tea bag.
Yeah, it went away.
Okay. Let me, before our last minutes subside, read these last two paragraphs so we can say we finished this section. How about that? Jesus is never upset at sinners. Check it out. He is only upset with people who do not think they are sinners. Jesus was fully at home with this tragic sense of life. He lived and rose inside it. I am now personally convinced that Jesus' ability to find a higher order inside constant disorder is the very heart of his message. I love that sentence. I am now personally convinced that Jesus' ability to find a higher order inside constant disorder is the very heart of his message, and why true gospel, as rare as it might be, still heals and renews all that it touches. And I think what he's talking about there is that subtraction versus addition. That subtraction is addition on the spiritual journey. That we're finding a higher order inside of the deconstruction, if you will, of life as we're moving forward in the spiritual journey. Again, another paradox. Jesus found and named the unified field beneath all the contradictions which Annie Dillard spoke of in the epigraph above. And what was that epigraph? She says, in the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters down, if you drop with them further over the world's rim, you will find what our sciences cannot locate or name, the substrate, the ocean or matrix or ether, which buoys up the rest, which gives goodness its power for good and evil its power for evil, the unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together here. This is given, it's not learned. So Jesus has found and named the unified field beneath all the contradictions which Annie Dillard speaks of. If we do not find that unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other, or what Buddhists call the great compassion, there is no healing to life's inconsistencies and contradictions. Religion is always about getting back and down into the unified field where you started anyway. All right. Good, we finished that section. So the great turnaround is next week. Any final thoughts from anybody? Well, Frank, are you going to introduce us to Laura?
Well, I think she's out changing right now. Hold on, let me see.
Well, that's bad timing.
Hold on,
Want to meet her.
Laura?
Yeah. Good one, Danielle. Yeah, how long are we going to wait?
Wow.
Oh, this got awkward. Okay.
I guess, yeah, no, it's not shower going, sorry.
What's that, Frank?
I said, sorry, I hear the shower.
Oh, well, just walk in there with your phone.
Yeah, I think that
I
would
really appreciate that.
Dave.
We're a friendly group.
Dave.
Are we still recording?
You want to make a good impression, don't you?
Dave.
This is
All right.
G-rated, Dave. Come on.
Enough of that. Enough of that.
Don't do it, Frank. Don't
guys.
go there. Don't go there, Frank. Don't do it.
Scott, save me, please.
Yeah. Seriously.
Dear God, forgive him for he knows not what he does.
Yeah.
Lord, we're so grateful we can laugh at these things and have a good sense of humor while we're really investigating and searching out answers to really the deep meanings and truths behind things. But we know you are that truth. So just be with us and guide us and direct us and inspire us and fill us with wisdom and discernment as we travel down the road on the journey we take hand in hand with you. It's in your mighty name we give our thanks and pray, Jesus. Amen.
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 All right. Well, Frank, say hi to Laura for all of us.
I
It's great to
will.
see her for a brief shining moment. And
Yep.
everybody will see you on Sunday, or you'll see us, and then we'll get together next Tuesday again. Good
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Everyone, good night,
Bye.
Jordana.
See you,
Thanks for all your
Jordana. See you
support,
next
everybody.
Sunday.
Bye.
I'll see you
Bye.
Sunday. Bye,
Good night.
Frank.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Good night. Bye, Scotty. Bye, Frank.
Bye.
Bye, Jordana. Bye,
Everybody.
Linda.
I'll see you Sunday for my birthday.
It's your birthday. We'll see you then. And you're going to lunch, right, Jordana, with us?
I assume we are. I'll ask Fernand just to make sure that I assume that we are doing lunch with you guys.
That would be very nice. I hope
And then
so.
I'll come in so you'll get to see her again.
Fantastic. Okay. See you guys.
Bye, you guys.
Good night.